All right, welcome everyone to Chapter 6, Ethical Issues in Business and Marketing. And what we're going to go through today, I've laid that out for you on your first slide. So if you're following along with me on the slide presentation, you'll see the title overview of Chapter, Ethical Issues in Business. And right underneath it, it's going to sort of summarize all of the major sort of fundamental pieces of this chapter, or the things that they're focusing on, and we're going to talk through each one of them as we go along. So basically, four different topics that we're going to cover in this chapter: competition, quality control of products and services, corporate responsibility in the environment, insider trading, and we're going to talk a little bit about advertising as well towards the end of the chapter to sort of sum things up. So the first thing to note in your chapter is this sort of notion competition. And we know that when we sort of live in a democracy, there is this this idea that we should be able to have all the opportunity to go out there and get as much as we can. If we work hard for the things that you want to attain, then you should be able to do that. And of course, some of us are going to work harder than others. So when we talk about competition, it is essentially a competition out there, and the workforce can be seen as a competition. But when you're running a business or an organization, we, as people working in an organization, should be asking questions about what honest competition is. And when we talk about that, it has to do with lower prices and higher quality of goods and services, because that's what we expect when there's competition. And I'm going to use an example here when we talk about competition. When we talk about competition, it's great to have competitive pricing as a consumer, but on the other side of as the organization, we have to decide which sort of routes we want to take in the way that we compete. And if we cheat or we are dishonest in our way of competing, then that's not a fair practice, and we would say, and it would be unethical. And so that's where this ties in. There's something that's morally wrong about people that are cheating when you're in a competition. And you can think about it from a variety of different angles. And business is pretty easy to sort of grasp how we know that companies are sometimes going to cut corners and make sort of dishonest choices in order to compete, even though we would say that that competition is not on fair, is not on sort of base level fair to everyone that's involved. So that's the first sort of thing that we're going to address. And if you look at in your textbook, page 173, it says, because competition is so deeply ingrained in our culture, there is also because competition is so deeply ingrained in our culture, there is a specific term for unethical competition, and we call it cheating, regardless if that's in academics or, if we're as students. Some of us, choose maybe to cut corners once in a while and cheat and or find a way to cheat. We would say, well, in the scope of the academia, that's not fair to everyone else. If you're in a competition, that competition needs to be fair and even across the board and equal to all participants. So we would say, okay, for competition, it's not a competitive market if there is people that are cheating. But at the same time, we know that companies sometimes are going to make choices. So we say, okay, whether it's cheating in academia or whether it's cheating in the sort of world of business, we have to expect that it's going to happen. And we also have to understand that and acknowledge that we are sometimes going to be involved with choices like that, where our values come into play. And that's the sort of background of what they're talking about here. You make a choice to cheat or not to cheat. And when you're part of an organization, you could be part of a decision one day where you are compromising your values, and you don't feel right about something. And we're going to talk about this when we get to advertising towards the end. The other sort of competition example that I mentioned at the beginning that I was going to give you is, let's suppose we have four, and there is a place in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, in the United States, right across our border, where there are, from what I remember and recall, four different auto parts stores on one corner, every corner on a particular intersection in that city. And we say, wow, that's great for consumers, because as consumers, we get more choice and the prices are going to be lower. And that's really, again, back on your slide. And we like that. We value that as consumers. We want those high quality goods and we want those high quality services. So now that we get a sort of sense of competition, we can talk about what regulates competition. And that's next on the slide there, Competition Act, page 174. What is that Competition Act concerned with? Or what does it bring to light? And what do we need to be concerned with in terms of the ethical sort of intersection with what regulates competition? Is, we would say, what makes it ethical? We need to have these things in place. And I've listed them there on the slide: confidentiality, fairness, predictability, timeliness, and transparency. All of these are things that the Competition Act outlines so that the system becomes, as I said before, fair to everyone involved and across the board. But even further than that, we have principles that we can look at for what governs that Competition Act. And I would invite you to take a look at page 174 of your book and read a little bit more about that Competition Act. Is on page 174 at the top of the page. And so those regulations are what we sort of look at. And then it also provides in your textbook, exercise 6.1, the analysis of the Competition Act. And it gives you an activity you can think about, although you don't have to complete. It's one that you can think about to draw this idea of competition out further. We want it to be fair. That's really the best way to summarize. Fair for everyone when people compete, and cheating is not fair. So next, quality control of products and services. What does that include, and how does that play into sort of ethically responsible decisions? So what does it include? Quality of materials and workmanship. We want quality in the materials that we buy, and we want good workmanship. We want reliability. We want performance under normal conditions, and we want to sort of reduce the potential for harm. And so all of these things are involved with the quality control of products or services. So that there's a term on that page, and we're on the slide presentation now at quality control, products and services. There's the term caveat emptor, which is a Latin term for no liability to consumers. In other words, the English translation for that caveat emptor is let the buyer beware. And so to a certain degree as consumers, we have to understand that there is often occasion where I'm buying a product or a service, and I have to be responsible enough to decide if I want that. I need to be aware of the different things that it offers. And so when we think about something like no returns, if you buy a product and you agree that there's no returns, then that's, let the buyer beware. You're supposed to be responsible of that. So those kinds of things come into play into this conversation. And then sort of the opposite to that is the duty of care. What are companies liable for? What are organizations liable for in terms of their qualities and the services that they provide? And where there's deficiencies, we need to be aware of them, and we need to acknowledge them. You'll see next on your slide, what does this involve? Intentionally or recklessly causing harm. Companies or organizations that sometimes do that. How are we going to look at that, and what can we say about it from an ethical point of view? Because if there is companies and organizations that do this, then awareness is key, right? Negligence. Did they know that they were causing a particular harm to another, to, for example, their consumers, right? The consumer that you gave that product or service to, or that you sold it to. So the failure to warn of possible harm, and then we're going to look at this example in your book, and that is on page 175, and it's a story of Menu Foods, and this teaches us how, from an application standpoint, what we need to look at in terms of quality control in connection with ethics. So we say, okay, in late February 2007, this is page 175 at the bottom, reports of kidney failure in pets began arriving at Menu Foods, a pet food producer based in Mississauga. Menu Foods recalled about 60 million cans and pouches of wet food manufactured between December 2006 and March 2007. While Paul Henderson, CEO of Menu Foods, claimed that the company had looked into early reports, it wasn't until 8 animals died following routine taste tests of Menu's products that the recall was made. And then so it tells us a story about this, and you can read the rest on your own. And okay, what's the sense of the story is that Menu Foods had a decision to make in terms of their quality control to recall a product, but instead of doing sort of what we would call due diligence and getting on it right away, they decided to wait until animals started dying before they made a decision. So that we would say, well, that's an unethical sort of motive, and these are the kinds of things that can happen at the extreme levels of quality control. So when we buy quality control, when we buy quality products, we expect that there is some kind of process behind it that regulates things. And that's, again, like the Competition Act, how this works with products and services. The next part that we'll sort of briefly touch on and then return to in the next video has to do with environmental issues. What are the environmental issues that companies deal with? I've listed them for you. Pollution, the use of natural resources, land health. These are all central to the concern about the environment from an ethical point of view. So when companies pollute, when they take away from our resources and don't put back, when we pollute, or we sort of infect, we might say, the natural environment with or we interfere, might be a better word. We interfere with wilderness areas and biological and ecological diversity. When we interfere with that, it's unethical. And if we're going to be doing it, let's talk about why it's so important to have land health over anything else in terms of breathing clean air, drinking clean water, and living on a sort of piece of natural land. So everything around us that we value. And so when we come back in the next video, we're going to talk exactly about that, just to draw out a little bit more on the environmental issues before we move on to corporate responsibility in the environment, insider trading, and then marketing. So I'll see you in the next video.